Hello, this is Scholars page, and this is continuation part 3 of my Java course on YouTube. In the last lesson, we learned how to work with text and as well as what to do when we are working with different variables inside of text messages. However, in this lesson, we will be looking at how the if condition and how to use the if condition. Now I'll create a new class and we'll call it if. And again, in this case, like the last lesson, I will not automatically make the main string. And actually, let's try to write it out ourselves, because why not? Public static void main string args. As you just saw, I did not make a second semicolon brackets, but Eclipse automatically made it for me. That's a neat little trick. So Eclipse always makes sure that you're writing with correct indentations. And of course, if you don't want to do this, you can do it automatically or use the shortcut of main and then sysout, which does it automatically as well. Now, although if condition is also how to work with conditions, if is mainly how you work with conditions, there's also another way to work with conditions, which we have actually already learned, which is through Boolean. Now let's say Boolean trial equals, let's say we are trying to check if 1 is smaller than 5. And then I'll do sysout to trial. Now this is kind of a condition where the Boolean checks if this condition which is written inside its variable is correct or not, and if we actually run this, it will display true, because indeed 1 is smaller than 5. And of course this works the other way around. Let's say 7, and again it's the same thing, since it is checking and trying to check if the variable is correct using actual mathematical equations and arithmetical logical processes. It first checks if the variable is correct. So in this case, it will check, is 7, the value of 7, smaller than the value of 5? If it's not, it will display false. Of course, there's also equals to and not equals to. The way you check not equals to is by doing one exclamation mark and then one equals. The exclamation mark is actually the symbol for not, and this can be done for any other operation, as in or, and like such as like these. And in this case, it will check if 7 is not equal to 5. Since that condition is true, it will display true. And of course, we can also check for equals to. Now the problem with equals to is if we only use one equal sign, it will be that we are assigning a value to something, another variable, or a value to a value, which does not make sense, which is exactly why we need to use two equals to sign when we are trying to check if something equals to another value. And in this case, it will come up false. Now we'll check out if. The main structure of a if condition is through this. We write if, we write a condition, and then we declare what happens if that condition is true. So let's say, for example, 1 is smaller than 5. I'll write sysout, it's correct. Now if I run this, it will display what I have written. Now how this works, how if condition works, is if checks that the condition that was written inside the statement is whether true or false, and if it is correct and true, it runs the first given process that is after the true statement. Again, if I do, for example, let's say in reverse 7, which is this, now this condition is not true, I will do run and it will display absolutely nothing. Now of course I can also check for equals to statement, and actually in this case not equal to will work better. And if we run this, the if condition will check if the condition is true in the statement. In this case it is true, 7 is not equal to 5, and which is why it does the first process that is in the statement. Now, of course, this is not that's all in a if condition. There's also an else condition, or sorry, then else process, which is when basically if the first condition is not true and it's actually false, what is the next step? Let's do, oops, let's do it's false. Now, in this case, it is true. If we do equals to and run the process, it is false. Now, how an if condition works is it checks if the condition, which is the statement, is true. And in this case, 7 equals to 5 is not true. So it skips over the truth operation, which is if it was true, it will have run this. It skips over that and straight goes to the else condition or else operation, in which if it's false, it will run this process, which in this case, it has done so. Now, of course, the first condition still works, which is if we run it now rather than doing it's false, it has changed it to it's correct, because 7 indeed is greater than 5. In this case, it checked that the condition is true, so it used the first operation for the truth condition rather than using the second operation, which it just skips entirely over, since that's not going to be used. Since in this case, the truth statement or the truth operation is in work, while the false operation will not be used or does not need to be even considered. Now we can also use a variable in a if condition, which is, let's say we declare a variable of int a equals to, let's say, 20. And rather than writing the condition there, we use the variable in the condition. So we write a is bigger than 5. Now if I run this, it will display it's correct because it's used the variable 20, which is greater than 5, to run the condition, and it uses the first operation since the condition is true. Now if we do, for example, smaller than, then if we run it, it will display the second false operation. But another thing we can do is use two if conditions at the same time, which is through using else if. In this case, else if checks the second condition, which we will declare, but you might ask, what's the purpose of an else if condition if there's an else operation? Now, for example, if I run this, it will first check the first condition, if, and then it checks the second condition, else if. In the first condition, if a is smaller than 5, 20 is not smaller than 5, so this operation has been not been considered. It goes to the second operation, which is a is bigger than 5, which indeed is correct, 20 is bigger than 5, so it runs the second operation. Now, the reason for using else if is for complex equations or complex mathematical processes, which typically you can see inside of loops, which are for loops and while loops, as well as inside of complicated structures of code. But it's because you can also write else and declare a third operation that will happen if neither of the first or the second conditions are true, which is this how, let's say, not unknown. We'll declare it as unknown or say it as unknown. Now let's say the is bigger than 10 and smaller than 5, and we say this is 7. So since it does not fall under either of the conditions, if we run it, it will use the third operation, since neither of the first two conditions are true, to answer or like to do this process. And also we can use else if as many times as we want. So I can also make this an else if condition, which is where, let's say, a is equal to 7, or actually let's say 8, as well as this can also have an else condition. And this is where you see where it starts to get pretty complicated, where there's multiple if condition, But typically, if we want to find multiple if conditions, we use the for loop to do multiple if conditions in inside of one digital code. And let's say like not considered. So if we do this, it will do the fourth one, not considered. But if our a is 8, it will do the third operation, which is a is equals to 8, so it's unknown. Now typically, let's use actual real life example where a is equal to 100, as in 100 kilometers. A car has traveled 100 kilometers. Now what I want to find out is if that kilometers is more than 100 or less than a 90, because the gas price changes based on those values. So I do smaller than 90 as the first condition, bigger than, bigger than 100 as the second condition, and the third condition can be the third condition can be that it is equals to 100. So in this condition, it checks if it's greater than 100. It will not consider if it's equal to 100 because it's not equal, greater or equal, so it's just greater than. In this condition, we check that if the mileage of the car or how many kilometers it has traveled is exactly equal to 100, in which case we can get for example, a discount on our gas price. And the last condition is if it's in the middle of this, and we will write normal price if it's lower than 90. We will say overpriced if it is bigger than 100. We'll say discount if it is exactly to 100, and we'll say let's say slightly overpriced. Now since a is in this case equal to 100, we'll check this condition, and it will tells me that actually I'll get a discount for how much gas I buy. And if example the kilometers that my car has traveled is 200, it will tell me it's actually the gas price I'll get will be overpriced, unfortunately, and there's nothing to do about it. But for example, if it is below 90 and let's say it's 30, it will tell me that I'll get a normal price for my gas. And this is where else and if conditions prosper, because you can do multitude of operations for one simple let's say one simple piece of code where you're trying to check multiple conditions, but you want specific result for each condition that might or might not be met. And this is basically how you use if and else condition, as well as we looked at how Boolean can be looked to check for conditions, and how we use Boolean to actually do conditional operations. This is it for this YouTube video, and this is it for how if conditions work. Thank you for watching.